أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Continuing on with the Prophet Alayhi'Ssalaam's military legendary legacy. This is the era of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, picking up on page number 490. In the biography of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, we talked about the Apostate Wars, and now it's still quite in the Apostate Wars per se, because of the fact that one who was claiming to be a false prophet during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, as far back as the Meccan period, is now going to be faced off by the Muslim army led by Khalid ibn Al-Waleed radiallahu anhu. And we talked about a few other key players leading up to that time. Over the army's two wings, Khalid ibn al-Waleed appointed Zayd ibn al-Khattab and Abu Khudayfa ibn Utban ibn Rabi'a, ibn Utba ibn Rabi'a. The men in the front part of Khalid's army came across 40 horsemen who were under the leadership of Mujai ibn Mirara al-Hanafi. These were members of the Banu Hanifa tribe who had absolutely no idea about the arrivals of Khalid's army. This is because they had been absent from Yamama for a while, being preoccupied with getting revenge on their enemies from Banu Tamim and Banu Amir tribes. On their way back to Yamama, they were surprised to see Khalid's army, and since there was no way to escape for them, they were forced to surrender and were taken as prisoners by Khalid ibn al-Walid's soldiers. When Mujai and his men were brought to Khalid, he asked them, "O children of Hanifa, what have you to say?" They, at the cost of their lives, said, "We say that none of us is a prophet and that one of you is a prophet." Based on their apostasy, Khalid, we say that one of us is a prophet and one of you is a prophet. Based on their apostasy, Khalid killed them. So I think we had touched this, but we're going to revisit it just a little bit to help. According to one account, Khalid asked them, "When did you first feel our presence in your region?" They said, "We never felt your presence in your region until you came up across us. We went out to exact revenge against the people of Banu Amir and Tamim." But Khalid did not believe them. He thought that they were spies that Musaylama had sent out for the purpose of gathering information. When Khalid made it clear that each and every one of them was to be killed, they pleaded only for the life of their leader, saying to Khalid, "Whether you want to help or hurt the people of Yamama tomorrow, keep this one alive." And as they said this, they pointed to Muja'ah, their leader. Khalid then spared Mujah's life and killed the rest of the prisoners. Mujah, a man of good lineage, was a well-respected chieftain of the Banu Hanifa tribe. Each time Khalid stopped to make camp, he invited Mujah to sit down beside him. Then the two of them would eat together and engage in conversation. On one of those occasions, Khalid asked him, "Tell me about your companion, Musaylama. What is it that he recites to you, and have you memorized any of his sayings, which he claims to be revelation from Allah?" Mujah replied, "Yes," after which he proceeded to recite some of Musaylama's poetry. Khalid, shocked at the silliness of what he was hearing, stood up, struck one of his hands against the other, and said, "O Muslims, come and listen to the enemy of Allah and how he opposes the Quran." Khalid then said, "Woe upon you, O Mujah! I consider you to be a chieftain who is wise and intelligent, and yet how can you buy into this nonsense? O enemy of Allah, listen to the book of the possessor of might and majesty, and then reflect on what the enemy of Allah, Musaylama, says. pales in comparison to it. Khalid then recited to him Sabbih Hisma Rabbika al-A'la. Surah number 87. Now, after Khalid finished his recitation, Mujahid softened his stance and decided to open up a little to Khalid, telling him this story. There was a man from Bahrain who knew how to read and write. Musaylama gave him preferential treatment, making him his closest companion. In spite of the status he enjoyed with Musaylama, the man would come out to us and say, "Woe upon you, O people of Yamama, your companion by Allah is a liar. I do not think that you would accuse me of being biased against him. For you see how he favors me over everyone else. By Allah, he lies to you, and he has taken pledges of allegiance from you based upon pure falsehood." Khalid asked, "What happened to the Bahraini?" Mujahid said he ran away. He would continue to speak in the manner until finally Musaylama found out what he was saying about him. Fearing for his life, the man ran away and went back to Bahrain. Khalid said, "Tell us more about the lies of this vile creature." Mujahid then related more of Musaylama's poetry, after which Khalid said, "And you people consider this to be the truth. You actually believed him." Mujahid said, "Had my people not considered what he said to be true, we would not have prepared to meet you tomorrow with more than 10,000 swords." Khalid said, "Then Allah is sufficient for us against you, and he will honor his religion by granting us victory. Indeed, it is against him that you are fighting, even though it is his religion that you are seeking out." Some people might have the impression that Khalid was purely a military man who had very little knowledge about Al-Islam, but that simply is not true. He radiallahu anhu was a man of profound faith, and the powers he had on the battlefield were derived from the faith that he had. Consider the above mentioned conversation and the strong faith and trust in Allah Khalid even had when he said, or how he articulated what he said, "Then Allah is sufficient for us against you, and he will honor his religion by granting us victory. Indeed, it is against him that you are fighting, even though it is his religion that you are seeking out." Yes, Khalid was a military man by nature, but he was more than that as well. He radiallahu anhu was a true believer who fought to raise the word of Allah above all else. May Allah Ta'ala be pleased with Khalid ibn Al-Waleed radiallahu ta'ala anhu and with all of the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Ameen. The actual battle is preceded by psychological warfare. If the pressure was on anyone regarding the upcoming battle, it was the followers of Musaylama. They had their backs up against the walls, with no hope of reinforcements from foreign allies. Yes, they had numbers and weapons, but they were all alone, the most of the peninsula under the banner of Al-Islam, with most of the banner of the peninsula under the banner of Islam was who they were facing, their opponents. The Muslims, on the other hand, had plenty of reinforcements they could rely upon if needed. What is more, Khalid's soldiers were fighting for the sake of Allah, and so they had nothing to lose, for even if they died, they would achieve martyrdom. Another advantage that Khalid ibn al-Waleed had over the enemy was that his soldiers were confident of victory. They were certain that Allah would help them. As for Musaylama's soldiers, they were at least doubtful about the outcome of the upcoming battle. Some of them weren't fighting to uphold their beliefs, but instead to show loyalty to their fellow tribesmen. Khalid ibn al-Waleed wisely decided to take advantage of this situation by waging psychological warfare against the enemy. For one thing, he sent Zayd ibn Lubayy to meet up with his friend Makhan ibn Tufail, who was one of the most respected chieftains of Yamama. Zayd's goal was to convince Makhan to change sides in the conflict. Also, Khalid ibn al-Waleed sought the help of Umayr ibn Salih al-Yashqari, who was a Muslim but who kept his Islam a secret from his fellow tribesmen. Umayr's faith was strong and he was inspired to convey a clear warning to his people, saying, "You are surrounded by Khalid ibn al-Waleed and men from the Muhajirin and the Ansar. If you think that you can beat them by your numbers, they will defeat you with the help of reinforcements. And you and they are not equal. Islam is growing strong and polytheism is becoming a thing of the past. Their companion, Allah Ta'ala's messenger, is a prophet, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and your companion is a liar. They have happiness with them, and all you have is deception. You are all being deceived by Musaylama's lies." The purpose of this speech was, of course, to lower the morale of Musaylama's soldiers. Khalid radiallahu anhu charged Thumama ibn Uthal al-Hanafi radiallahu anhu with a similar mission. He was to go to his fellow clansmen from the Banu Hanifa tribe and instill fear into their hearts. When he went to them, he said, "Verily, two prophets do not come together at the same time for the same purpose. Indeed, there will be no prophet after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there is no prophet that was sent along with him. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq has sent to you a man who goes neither by his own name nor by the name of his father. Rather, he is simply called the sword of Allah. He has many swords with him, so think hard and long about what you want to do." End quotes. As should be clear to the reader by now, Khalid ibn al-Waleed meticulously took every possible step to achieve victory against his enemy. The key to his attitude was that he never underestimated his enemy. As such, he was always prepared and one step ahead of his opponents. He was a brilliant military man for his entire life, even back when he was a polytheist. He, through his careful planning strategy, was one of the main reasons why the polytheists of Mecca fared so well during the Battle of Uhud. Khalid ibn al-Waleed radiallahu anhu was described by his soldiers as a man who would be vigilant even during his sleep. Every night he was fully prepared for the events of the following day, and he always tried to learn as much as possible about his enemy. Prior to the commencement of the battle, Khalid ibn al-Waleed made his final preparations. He sent two scouts, Mukhannaf ibn Zayd al-Khail and his brother Huraytha, to gather information about the enemy. He gave the banner of his army to Abdullah ibn Habsi ibn Ghanim and later on to Salim, the freed slave of Abu Hudayfa. Khalid radiallahu anhu then divided his army into 5 divisions, appointing Khalid al-Makhzumi to lead the division that was at the front of the army, Abu Hudayfa to lead the right-wing division of the army, Suja to lead the left-wing of division, Zayd ibn al-Khattab to lead the division that was at the heart of the army, and Usama ibn Zayd to lead the cavalry, and he ordered Dahdan to remain in the rear of the army, which is where the women and tents were situated. These were Khalid's final preparations prior to the commencement of the battle. The fighting begins. As the two armies marched towards one another, Musaylama delivered a quick speech reminding his soldiers about what would happen if they lost the battle. He quotes, "Today is the high day that you show your sense of honor. Verily, if you are defeated, your women will be married off as slaves. So fight to preserve your lineage and to protect your women. Khalid stopped on the way, end quote. Khalid stopped on the way and built a makeshift military command post on the hill that overlooked Yamama. Shortly thereafter, the two armies clashed. Musaylama's soldiers gained an early advantage to the degree that they were able to enter Khalid's command post. Finding Tamim there, they intended to kill her, but Muja'a who was there as a prisoner, forbade them from doing so. He said to them, "She is noble and good free woman, so leave her alone." While Musaylama's soldiers were able to initially penetrate the ranks of Muslim fighters, they did suffer an important loss, for Zayd ibn al-Khattab was able to kill one of their leaders, the infamous Scaldrud al-Rajail bin Unfuya. And we talked about him in the earlier videos. The advantage that was enjoyed by Musaylama's army was short-lived, for Muslim fighters were quickly able to repel them and force them to retreat. The Muslims fought in an organized manner. Khalid ibn al-Waleed had placed a banner over each battalion, so as to distinguish between the Muhajirun soldiers and the Ansari soldiers and Bedouin soldiers. As long as each respective group remained close to their specific banner, chaos would be averted and they would be able to distinguish between friend and foe. The flag bearer of the Ansar, Thabit ibn Qais, buried his legs into the ground as a means of showing his resolve to remain steadfast on the battlefield. He radiallahu anhu was rewarded for his act of bravery with martyrdom. Other Muslim soldiers displayed a similar degree of bravery on that day. Zayd ibn al-Khattab, Umar ibn Khattab's brother radiallahu anhu, said, "By Allah, I will not talk again until either Allah causes them to be defeated or I meet Allah as a martyr." Being able to speak to him with my proof, his proof being that he fought bravely until the end. Shortly thereafter, he too gained martyrdom on the battlefield. Yet another brave fighter on that day was Abu Hudayfa radiallahu anhu, who called out to other Muslim soldiers saying, "O people of the Quran, adorn your knowledge of the Quran with your actions." He then plunged into the ranks of the enemy fighters, forcing them to turn back and retreat. In doing so, he suffered some serious wounds. Though it is hard to rank the Muslim fighters on that day based on their level of courage, we can be certain that Khalid ibn al-Waleed was one of the bravest and most fearless of them all. Any enemy fighter that came even near him, he killed. He radiallahu anhu set an example for his soldiers, not remaining at the rear of the army but fighting from the first row, and sometimes even advancing ahead of the front row in order to attack a group of enemy fighters all by himself. The Muslims fought with determination and patience. It was hard work, but they continued to advance while the enemy continued to retreat. Finally, the will of enemy fighters was broken and they turned their backs and began to run away from pursuing Muslim soldiers. That would have been the end of the conflict had it not been for Muhaim ibn Tufail, who rallied his troops, ordering them to gather inside of enclosed garden, a garden that came to be known as the Garden of Death. Once they were all inside, Musaylama's followers closed all of the gates, setting the stage for a siege. Muqam, however, did not get inside on time, for while he was calling out to soldiers and giving them instructions, Abdurrahman ibn Abu Bakr fired an arrow at him, hitting him directly in his neck. Allahu Akbar. As Muqam fell down to the ground and died, his fellow tribesmen closed the gates of the garden. Shortly thereafter, the Muslim army had the entire garden surrounded. Al-Bara ibn Malik, this is the fifth rare act of bravery. Al-Bara radiallahu anhu, not wanting to protract siege, called out saying, "O group of Muslims, throw me over the gate into the garden so that I can open the gate from the inside and let you all in." This was more than an act of bravery on the part of Al-Bara, for a sea of enemy soldiers awaited him on the other side of the gate, which meant that going through with his request involved near certain death. and yet he was resolved to go through with his plan. Muslim soldiers placed him on the top of a number of shields, and having those shields up with spears until he was high enough to jump over the gate. Upon landing on the other side of the gate, Al-Barra was greeted by a sea of fighters. Nonetheless, he miraculously was able to defend off their blows for long enough to open the gate. With the gate now open, the Muslim soldiers flooded into the garden, and some of them opened other gates, allowing soldiers to enter more quickly. What followed then was not so much as a battle as it was a seek out and destroy mission. As large as the garden was, the polytheists knew that they were cornered and that the end was near for them. Musaylama, may Allah Ta'ala curse him, was inside of the garden, hiding in a gap along one of the garden's walls. Furious and foaming at the mouth, he was not able to do anything about his army's dire situation. So he just stood there in shock, hoping that Muslims would not see him. But Wahshi ibn Harb, the freed slave of Jubayr ibn Mut'am, it was the same Wahshi who had murdered Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the prophet, one of the prophet's uncles, had been murdered at the battle of Uhud. But he was a Muslim, but now Wahshi is a Muslim. This was the opportunity for redemption that Wahshi had wanted for a long time. He saw Musaylama. He killed one of the best people on earth, and now, as an act of redemption, he now had a good and practicing Muslim wanted to kill one of the most evil people on earth. A skilled spear thrower, Wahshi took him and threw his spear. It pierced right through Musaylama's body. Exiting from the other side, Musaylama was as good as dead, but he's still standing up. Abu Dujana Simak ibn Kirasha then raced towards him and struck him with his sword, causing him to fall down onto the ground. A woman who was inside of a nearby building saw what happened and screamed out, "Oh, the loss of a pure leader. He has been killed by a black slave." Approximately 10,000 apostate fighters were killed in the garden, although some historians have said that the number of their fallen soldiers was closer to 21,000. Hence the new name of the Garden of Death. The number of Muslim fatalities in the garden ranged between 500 and 600, and Allah knows best. Among the Muslims who died were some of the most eminent of the Prophet ﷺ's companions. Once the garden was secure, Khalid ibn Al-Waleed walked through it, and he was followed by Muja'a ibn Murara, who, being a prisoner, was tied up in chains. Khalid took Muja'a with him because he wanted him to identify for him the dead corpse of Musaylama. When they passed by the dead body of Ar-Rajal ibn Unufaya, Khalid asked, "Is this him?" Muja'a said, "No, by Allah, this man is better than Musaylama. This is Ar-Rajal ibn Unfawa." Finally, when they passed by snub-nosed, yellow-skinned man, Mujahid said, "This is the one you are looking for." Khalid said, "May Allah disfigure all of you for following him." Khalid then sent out horsemen, ordering them to ride throughout Yamama and gather all of the wealth and female prisoners of the city. Number 3, Abu Aqil radiallahu anhu, a man from the Ansar, was one of the first people to be injured on the day of Yamama. He became hurt as a result of an arrow that struck him somewhere between his shoulders and his heart. It was a serious but not lethal wound blow, and he was able to pull out the arrow. Nonetheless, his entire left side became weak, and so he returned to Muslim encampment in order to seek medical attention. When the fighting became intense and the Muslims were forced to head back towards their encampment, Ma'an ibn Adi called out, O people of Ansar, remember Allah, Allah, and turn around and bear down upon your enemies, so as to set an example for others. Ma'an radiallahu anhu then raced ahead of everyone else, plunging directly into the ranks of the opposing army. And the people of the Ansar, in response to Ma'an's plea, were right behind him. At that point, Abu Aqil radiallahu anhu got up, intending to catch up to his Ansari brothers. Some Muslims tried to convince him to stay where he was, saying to him, O Abu Aqil, you are not fit for fighting. Abu Aqil, referring to Ma'an's plea for help, said, the caller mentioned me by name. Someone responded, the caller merely said, O people of the Ansar. He was not referring to injured fighters. Abu Aqil replied, and I am from the Ansar, and I will answer his call to arms, even if I have to crawl towards the enemy. Because his entire left side was weak and numb, Abu Aqil radiallahu anhu was able to hold sword with his right hand only. Nonetheless, with pure grit and determination, he marched towards the enemy, all the while calling out, O people of Ansar, let us launch a renewed attack like we did on the day of Hunayn. Every member of that elite Ansari group then fought with high spirit, seeking out one of two things: victory or martyrdom. With their renewed attacks, they forced the enemy to retreat and seek refuge in the Garden of Death. During the course of this assault, Abu Aqil's arm was cut off. In fact, he was inflicted with a total of 14 wounds, each of which was lethal in and of itself. Inshallah, we will stop here, page number 400. Well, let's just say 400, let's backtrack on that one. We are going to stop at page number 500. Inshallah, and continue, pick it up from there. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik wa tabarak asmu rabbik wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruk wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.